Thank heavens for teachers. Seriously, I think we've got a number of educators here. Let's just give them a hand before I even get started. I owe so much to my teachers for teaching me that this is not boring stuff, but it's actually exciting and essential for our lives and for our appreciation of all the world around us. And time and again, as a student, teachers gave the non-physical but educational equivalent of a dope slap to me. And trust me, no skin actually touched my cheek. But sometimes, we have to be told, this is really neat. And as a high school sophomore, I was sure of one thing: Shakespeare is boring. I tried to read him because I was told it was exciting, but it didn't work. I couldn't understand it. Well, one time one of my English teachers brought in one of the teachers of the seniors, and he brought with him a record player, if you can imagine it, and some long playing record discs, because he knew something, that Shakespeare was not meant to be read. He was meant to be watched or listened to. And that was actually extremely exciting, because he had to entertain people who were standing up in the courtyard for 3 hours and keep them laughing, even in the worst tragedy. And he had a record, a long-playing disc of many, many discs of Hamlet, supposedly the most boring thing in the world as far as I knew. And Richard Burton was playing Hamlet, and Hume Cronyn, the late Hume Cronyn, played Polonius, who is the part that I should probably play in Hamlet, because he was long-winded and boring and always used 50 words if 2 would suffice. Getting a nod here. And people dreaded being around him because he wouldn't shut up. Well, early on in the play, Laertes is saying goodbye to his sister and is taking forever to do it. He's giving her a lot of advice, mostly keep the door locked and don't hang around with boys, probably because he knows. And then his sister warns him if he doesn't get out of there, their dad, Polonius, is going to come by and bore both of them. And sure enough, he does. And Polonius begins by scolding his son for not having left. The boat is going to be leaving soon, taking him back to France and to school, leaving boring Denmark, whereas we learned earlier in the play something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And then he says, there, my blessing with thee and these few precepts in thy memory. Few precepts, I don't think so. Give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought as act. Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. Those friends thou hast and their adoption tried, grapple them unto thy soul with hoops of steel. But do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new hashed unfledged comrade, which means don't spend money on your new friends. Beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. Give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. Costly thy clothes as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy. And neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulleth edge of husbandry. And this above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessing season this in thee. And of course, he's not done. He's about to continue with more advice. But he could have said just simply, very simply, to thine own self be true. And that would have been good enough. But it wasn't like him to do that, and so he has to stretch out some very simple things in a very boring way, and to do it in an extremely funny manner. If you go YouTube that scene, you'll see many different famous actors taking their turn at delivering all of the boring stuff. Well, Paul, in the book of Romans, to me, is boring. This book is way too long. He could have said it pretty quickly. And indeed, he's always ready to give advice, as in this particular passage where he reminds us of the 10 Commandments and that we're not supposed to do this stuff. And there are, I just got a feeling that once Paul got going dictating, the poor fellow who was writing it down for him, must have been just looking over his shoulder like, seriously? Seriously, you already said that? But at least in this passage, while giving us boring stuff, giving us advice for things we already know. We already know, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and all the rest of those commandments. Maybe he forgot them, so we got a break. But he does say, fortunately, finally, gets to the heart of the things. Just as Polonius says, to thine own self be true, which is really the best advice we can give to a person. He gets down to the core. Don't owe anybody anything except to love each other. Period. Stop there. That is essential. That is, at its heart, the key to life and happiness. I was sharing with the folks, I think in the Daniel Bible study, that the great Jewish leader Hillel, who lived 120 years and died in the year 10 AD, and was the teacher of Gamaliel, who was the teacher of the Apostle Paul. So there's a direct connection there. Hillel was once asked by a skeptic, can you teach me the law while standing on one leg? Because if you do so, then I'll be your student. Well, there were, according to count, 613 laws in the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. 613. And there was endless commentary on those. But Hillel, who knew the commentary and indeed had written much of it, turned to this person and said, whatever you don't want done to you, don't do to another. That's the law. Everything else is commentary. That, of course, you will recognize the golden rule, which exists in 2 forms throughout all the religions of the ancient world. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or don't do unto others as you don't want them to do unto you. Either way, it works pretty good. And that is the essence of the law, to be good to each other, to love each other. Everything else is just commentary. As he says here, in the Word, this is how it's summed up. Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that's our story. I mentioned last week the Romans had a different story that involved the Trojan horse and the fall of Troy and the gods bringing Aeneid over the ocean through many adventures and finally coming to Rome to found the eternal city. So this is the city that's supposed to rule the world. This is the eternal city, and everybody else shut up and do what we say, because that was the essence of the Roman law. Pay your taxes and don't give us trouble, and we'll put up with almost anything else. That was their story. The Christian story is to owe no one anything except to love each other. Love your neighbor as yourself. And by the way, as we discover, because as it says, everything else is commentary, your neighbor includes those pesky Samaritans whom you don't like, and everybody else as well. So the challenge is there, to be different than the rest of the world. Some say this is a dog-eat-dog world. We say this is a world based on the cross, in which death gives life. The animals eat the plants. The animals die. They are taken back into the earth, and they feed the plants, and so on and so on. Death brings life. Even our own deaths leave room for others to begin to authentically become the people that God meant them to be. So we don't see it as the one who dies with the most toys wins. Our story is the one who shares the most toys wins. The one who leaves behind a legacy of love and life wins. And we still die in the end, but we see it in a much different way. Oh, nothing but love. Our sisters and brothers in Nigeria are making this happen. Last year, Samuel Dolly, the leader of the Nigerian church, told us at the Brethren World Assembly that when some young men came back to him from his church and were so proud that they had burned down a mosque, he sent them back to rebuild it. And people were already dying by then. So we make excuses. Like right after 9/11, at my last church, where people were supporting the torture of captures on our part. Because that's not us. That's not our story as Americans. And I said, what would Jesus do? And the response was, this is war. It doesn't matter what Jesus said. We'll do that later. Our Nigerian sisters and brothers are enduring real torture, real death, real danger. And they're insisting that the gospel is true. We have no persecution, and the only thing that keeps us from church is somebody gave us a better offer, and we thought we'd go do that instead. And yet we find every reason to break down that law of love and say it only counts when I'm talking about these people and not that people. Well, there's a good way we can show the world we mean it when we talk about loving each other and serving each other, and you get the chance again. You know, when I came here, I always say, I want to see how we do things because I don't know, and there's often we're doing things really well. There's no reason for me to mess with something. Boy, was I happy after our love feast at Easter time. What a wonderful time. People were talking, there was joy, there was laughter, but there was also the very serious work of service, of washing each other's feet, and serving each other, and showing to the world that in doing what Jesus did and what Jesus told us to do, there's nothing we won't do to serve each other. And our deacons are working to make this an even more joyful celebration, and we want to encourage even more of us to be there, because we had a really high percentage, a much higher percentage of church folks at the Love Feast in the spring than at other churches I've experienced. Very impressive. And I would like to encourage even more to come. We want to make people know that their children are welcome, and if they have really young children who may not be able to, who might make it hard for them to enjoy, we don't mind if they make noise at all. We're happy if they do. But if it's going to make it hard for some of our parents, we'll have some child care with people from outside our church to help out there too. We will have hand washing for those for whom it is easier to do because of their physical disabilities or other things, because they've gotten a little older and it's kind of hard to bend down to one knee to do that. And we just encourage folks who've never been to one to feel free to come, take part in what you want to take part in, observe what you want to observe. And to make it even easier, you'll be able to smell everything cooking here in worship on that Sunday in October, the first Sunday, and then go straight here right after worship and take part. I hope you'll want to do it because it does take bravery, because it's showing the world we're different. The Romans understood that this radical act of gathering around a table in love is dangerous and even traitorous. In the Roman world, men did not eat with women, rich did not eat with poor, Jew did not eat with Greek speaker, the educated did not eat with the uneducated. They drew as many lines as they could as to who could eat together. And that's why when Pliny the Elder, a Roman governor in Asia Minor, wrote to the Emperor Trajan, he said that he had to discover what is so dangerous about these Christians. So he had two deacons, both of them women, both of them slaves, which tells you that church leadership included slaves and women. He had two deacons tortured to find out what happened. All he could discover is that before dawn, and it was before dawn because so many of them were slaves, they had to get to work. Before dawn, they met to share a meal and sing a hymn to Christ as to a God. Now, he was still intending to kill all those who did not renounce Christianity. But that was the crime. It's the same here. We bring so much baggage of our own. We bring our life with all of our disappointments and all of our struggles and all of our sorrows. We bring all of our mistakes, the things we wish we could erase, as well as the things we're kind of proud of, and rightfully so, and the times when we've bent over backwards in the service of another, and the times when we surprised ourselves by how much the light of Christ was shining out of our lives. We bring all of that together to the table. And then we eat. Nothing magical happens except that we prove once again that, as Paul says, we put on the Lord Jesus and we ignore what the world wants us to do and instead recognize that the time, as it says here, is far gone and the day is at hand, that this is the only moment God gives us. And if at that moment we have a chance for any reason, whether here at the Love Feast, at a restaurant when we run into somebody we didn't expect, at an invitation from one person to another to come together around their table, in whatever way or form we break bread and show the love of Christ by just being joyful that we are around each other. At the table, helping somebody fix a flat tire, visiting somebody in the nursing home, writing a check where a check is needed, and writing a check on our own lives when we're needed, showing that we fulfill the law, whether it's as Hillel, that wise men from so many years ago, whether Paul, and most important, whether Jesus tells us to do these things. We show that life is lived best in love with each other. I would conclude by simply saying, remember, you don't have to go to the Love Feast. You get to go to the Love Feast. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Amen.